Hello world of YouTube, and welcome to another Reformatted Discography review, the segment where I sit down and talk about all of the old discography reviews, putting them in the new format that I adorned with the channel Resurgence, and updating them on any records I may have not talked about between reviews. And today, I'm going to be talking about the industrial, adjacent, cybernetically tinged metal outfit Static X, a band that, as I stated in a listening log update last year, I'm a pretty adamant fan of. They have a soft spot in my heart out of the bands I covered early on in the career. And yeah, it was a treat to kind of go back and revisit these records and kind of update, and being able to update this review because it was one of the first ones I did on the channel. They have 7 records in their catalog. I'm not going to be talking about Wayne's Pig Hammer, but I am going to be talking about the new record and all of the old stuff that they had done prior. So let's go ahead and get going. So if you caught my albums that need a remaster video, this was on there because immediately upon revisiting this record, especially coming off of listening to the new record, it was abundant that the production on this record is just awful. Everything is very flat. The guitars sound very muted, you know, even though they got that crunch. It's like a flat, gray, dull crunch. Wayne's voice just feels so strained in a way that just doesn't sound good. There's elements that I like on here, but Wayne, the way they produced Wayne's voice sounds more like a bark than it does like a growl, and it just is unappealing to the ears. On top of that, and the guitars, the drums are just really terribly mixed. I talked about all this in that video, but this album has fundamental flaws that set it back. On top of that, some of the songs just don't punch as good. I don't mind the opener Lunatic, but I feel like the production on the industrial sounds is a little rough. I like a track like Terminal as well, and I feel like the album's biggest shining moment, honestly, is its closer, Grind to Halt. I love the synth production on that song. I actually think the guitars really mesh well with it, and I like the way that sounds. And I also like how on a track like Stingray, Tony's vocals feel a little more pronounced, because even on the records of theirs that I do enjoy, Tony's voice feels a little subdued in the mix, and I like that he does get to stand out a little more. But by the by, this record is just not good because of its production ideals and some of the more underwhelming tracks, like Z28, Terrified. Really, a lot of the tracks that deal with Wayne writing about his wife, I don't really like those songs. I think that, again, there are better songs on here that stand toe-to-toe with some of their better moments, but this is the most cherry-picking experience that a record of theirs has. You know, even the records of theirs after this, even if they may seem a little low to some people, the quality jump between this and the next record is pretty large, and it's not just because of those underwhelming songs. The production on this record just flat-out sucks. I think it's for morbid curiosity and a cherry-picking experience for sure, but it has merit. It's just held back a lot by some of its sonic ideas at their core. I know initially I really liked this record, and what's weird is the more I kept spinning their catalog, as much as I liked this record, I just kept putting it down a notch every single time. Because while I enjoy it, and I think it has some very bright moments, like the opener Get to the Gone, which has just this immediacy to it that just throttles the listener right into the cut, and I enjoy that about it. And it has other tracks that I really enjoy, like the Otsego song on here. I think the Otsego song is great. I like the bigger single from here, Cold. I like the other single from here, Black and White. I think that this is a solid step up, or it's a solid sort of next place after Wisconsin Death Trip, but the more I kept spinning this record in comparison to the other records, I think it's just not as punchy, it's not as powerful, whether it's the production, whether it's Wayne's performance, whether it's just the overall sound of the record. While it does feel like they're trying to expand upon Wisconsin Death Trip, they did other sort of expansions in other records better. You know, like I said, this record has some powerful punches, but similarly to Cult of Static, it honestly just doesn't feel as holistically great as the other records that they would put out. I think that if you enjoy Wisconsin Death Trip, you should definitely get to this project because there are very comparable sonic cohesive elements between the two. The production on here is a little punchier, which I really enjoy, and I feel like ultimately the production and the quality of songs that are more consistent are what set it above Cult of Static, but I do feel like it's one of the more forgettable releases as a whole across their discography because Wisconsin's a better project, Shadow Zone's a better project, so it kind of sits in the middle between those two really good records in their career, and it's easily passed on, and I could see why. Because while it has some heavy hitters, it ultimately is also very underwhelming, or very forgettable, I should say, in comparison. Again, on its own, it's still a pretty solid-ass record within this genre. The band feels like they're punching under their weight with this project because the production isn't as colossal as it is on Shadow Zone, and the hook writing isn't as big or prominent as it was on Wisconsin Death Trip. It's here, but it's not as potent. Again, it's a good next step record. If it's a good place to get to eventually. If you're morbidly curious as to this record in their catalog that again seems kind of under-discussed, but I will say there is a reason for that. It's solid. It's good in its own rights, but it is a little underwhelming in comparison to the rest of their catalog. I actually thought I would be putting this higher because when I do revisit it, I enjoy this project a lot. And while it kind of reads like a warning sign for some of the things to come on their follow-up record, Cult of Static, Wayne's vocals are a lot more harsh on here than they are on a lot of their catalog, and that bark that's present on Cult of Static is also here in a large prominence, but the production and a lot of the synthetic ideals help propel this record above Machine. There's a lot more solo work on the guitars on this project in a way that feels flashier in presentation that I really enjoy. Whether it's the opener Cannibal or Behemoth. I love the synthetic vocals on Chemical Logic. I love the song Cut You Up. It's the song that I revisit the most from this project still. When I was spitting this record, even when I was done, I kept coming back to Cut You Up because I love the hook of that song, I love the cadence of Wayne's vocals, and I love the guitars on it. I feel like this is definitely the most intense Static X project sonically because the guitars have a good bite to them, the drums are very punchy, and Wayne's bark-style vocals are produced in a way that enhances those sonic elements, and again, those synthetic tones mesh really well with that as well. Ultimately, I enjoy Wayne's balance of clean and aggressive vocals that are on a majority of the rest of their catalog. But this is honestly a very good record. I feel like if you enjoy projects like Shadow Zone and you want something a little heavier, listen to Cannibal because it does feel like a good, heavier version of some of the ideas on that. The synthetics feel a little more in line of what was being produced by them in that era. Start of War, the record between these two, feels a little streamlined and a little more cut and dry. This feels like them elevating to something else, and while I like Start of War more, I enjoy what's here because of what it does to the band's sound. It's unfortunate that it would lead to one of their weaker records in their career, but what's here is great. This is a good record. I feel like, again, if you like this sort of thing, and that's kind of the caveat I'm presenting to a lot of this, if you like this style, give this a listen. Give it a nice, it's a nice next place to go. I think it's very, very good.
And they're just daring me to kill again.
And I will say, I was still very surprised by their new record, and that's why I put it above Cannibal. Again, I have issues with some of the ideas in it. I don't like that Tony is utilized seemingly less on the project than Wayne and the singer they got in to step in for Wayne. But the production here feels more in line with their stuff traditionally, which is why it's above Cannibal. It feels more back to basics, but Static X basics are what drew me in the first place. And when they announced they were doing a record in tribute to Wayne, this is what I was wanting. I was wanting tracks like Hollow, like Accelerate, like all these years, like Terminator Oscillator, that have a nice clean hook, or a nice like cut and dry hook with some beefy riffs and some old school style synthetic production. And that's what you got here. Even a track like Atzico Placebo, which has, again, one of those kind of just cyclical structures and choruses, it works because it's what Static X was all about. I think that this was a nice sort of nostalgia trip sonically. The production feels very indebted to its time, and that's something that I think is very charming about the record. A record in 2020 shouldn't sound like this, and I can understand why any new listeners or anybody who's not aware of Static X giving this a spin may think it's dated, may think it's terrible, may think it really shouldn't have existed. But as a fan of this band, as somebody who listened to these guys a lot in high school and liked a lot of what this era of metal was doing, I appreciate this project a lot more than I probably should. But again, I think that it's a nice trip down memory lane, and the lyrics reflect that as well, like tracks like All These Years. And I appreciate that as well. I think the new vocalist works. I think that he doesn't like one-to-one sound like Wayne, but he's not really trying to. He feels like a nice, good companion to Wayne's vocals. But I do like Wayne's vocals on here. I liked hearing him do clean hooks again, clean singing more prominently. And it was nice to hear that after following 2 records where he was bark central. You know, and I appreciate that they were so indebted to... They had found recordings that they were able to make so indebted to what made Static X great to begin with. And again, if you like Wisconsin Death Trip or Machine and you want something a little more like those records, this is a good sort of companion piece. It's a nice next step record in their catalog. It's not a gateway, but it's a good place to get to if you've liked stuff that I recommend more highly to start with than this. It's a nice tribute. It's a touching record in its own regard in that way, but it still has the same punch that you may come to like from this band if you like some of their other stuff that you've heard so far in their catalog. You could probably argue Shadow Zone was my gateway into Static X, because I had heard singles from Wisconsin Death Trip, and I kind of spun Wisconsin Death Trip and Shadow Zone kind of similarly around the same time, and you know, a track from Shadow Zone was on Need for Speed Underground, so I wasn't too unfamiliar with the band once I decided to sink my teeth into them, and I would argue Shadow Zone is probably one of the better gateways into Static X, if only because while the production is a little beefier than a lot of what they were trying to go for initially and what they kind of pay in tribute to on the new record, Shadow Zone is just so fucking good, man. Like, I was tempted to put it above What's Next, but I really enjoy What's Next a lot. But I mean, from the opening moments of the denseness within Destroy All and how bleak a lot of that record sounds, it feels like the Power Man 5000 record that should have been. You know, the production has this hugeness to it. The chorus is fucking soar a lot bigger than they do on Wisconsin Death Trip and Machine. You know, it kind of paves the way a lot of what they would do on its follow-up record in a positive way. You know, I love the colossalness on Destroy All or Shadow Zone. I love the sort of bite on the chorus of New Pain. I love Otzigo Electric. That might be my favorite Otzigo song. It has just a great throttling sound to it that I really enjoy. I think the riff work on here is tight as fuck, and I like the production style on here. I like the synthetic palette that this record decides to toy with, that they again would sort of expand upon on Cannibal as well. You know, I think this is a nice, straightforward album that feels it's sort of distanced a little bit from the more nu metal centric sounds that were explored on a record like Wisconsin Death Trip. Sure, it's kind of here still, and it's in their tuning and their riff construction, but the production and a lot of the sounds on it feel a little broader than the strokes that would be painted on like a nu metal across a nu metal band. You know, I enjoy Static X for that sort of melding of new and industrial metal, but this definitely feels like another step down the line in that direction, and I appreciate that about it. And it's also why my favorite album is actually my favorite album, even though this is third. You can probably guess which one is my favorite, judging by how I'm talking. But again, this is a good gateway record. It's a really good collection of tunes that sort of embody what Static X is about without being bogged down in a trendy sound or having Wayne experiment vocally with things that may be disengaging to somebody. You know, I feel like if you want the most cut and dry Static X experience, it's Shadow Zone. You know, and it's so good. And a fun fact about it, it's a clean ass record. lyrically. You know, while Cannibal has a clean version on Spotify that they should change because that record has some nice usage of vulgar verbiage. They didn't need it on Shadow Zone. They just wrote some clean ass jams for people to sink their teeth into, and so it's the most wholesome Static X project. Even though there's a song in here called "Kill Your Idols." Ultimately, I put Wisconsin Death Trip above Shadow Zone is because even if it is probably the most new metal record in their catalog, riff-wise, and production-wise, I really enjoy the synthetic tones on here, and I feel like they have a certain charm that is lost on a record like Shadow Zone. You know, as much praise as I threw that record, and I feel like this is more a gateway for new metal fans. If you're a fan of new metal and you never listened to Static X because you thought they were a little too industrial tinged, listen to Wisconsin Death Trip. You know, this is the era that a lot of people... This is the era that wanted to do the Project Regeneration. Because while they rotated members kind of post-Machine or post-Shadow Zone, this was the group of guys that helped pull the new stuff together. You know, you have Tony's low rumble vocals with his low rumbling bass. You know, you have Koichi's nice guitar line that acts as a good companion to Wayne's guitars. Wayne's vocals on here are clean as fuck, and the production kind of feels more in line with that new metal era, with how the guitars are produced and how the synthetics are almost melded with it. You know, I love the sample work on "I'm With Stupid." I love the very late '90s PlayStation ass synthetics on tracks like "Bled for Days" and "Love Dump." I like Otzygolation as well. It has that same kind of sound to it that feels very indebted to late '90s synthetic, industrial adjacent music. And I really enjoy that about it. You know, it's probably the most dated sounding record in their catalog because even the production on like Project Regeneration sounds a little more modernized than this. I can appreciate what's here for what it does musically for the band and musically for the culture of, you know, industrial adjacent stuff. You know, it's not as dense as like a Shadow Zone. It's not as broad, more expansive sonically as like the next record I'll be talking about. But I like that it's a little more straight-laced. Again, it's another good gateway record into the band because it's basic ass, industrial adjacent ass, new metal ass music, but that's all it's trying to be. You know, it's fun. Wayne has a good bite when he wants it, like on the hooks of "Push It" and "Wisconsin Death Trip" and "I'm With Stupid," but they also do a good job of just creating this sound that's intrinsically tied to their sort of subsect and niche that they're trying to fill. And I can appreciate that. Again, while I think Shadow Zone is more of a gateway record to the band in general, to more records of theirs that sound a little less like this, like Cannibal, if you like this sound, if you like bands like Fear Factory and Linkin Park, and you've never listened to Static X, you're doing yourself a disservice because, or even like a Powerman 5000, and you've never listened to Static X, you're doing yourself a disservice because this record is honestly really fucking fun. And that's, I think, was the point of this era of metal. It wasn't, while it was all drenched in darkness and bleakness, you know, it had an ounce of fun to it. And I feel like Static X did a good job at balancing that fun with that heavy, jump the fuck up mentality. And I enjoy that about it. That's why I can go back and listen to these old Static X records and have a good time. It's because of records like Wisconsin Death Trip. It's nothing too high concept. It's not high art, but it's not trying to be. And that's fine. However, Start a War is a completely different story. This record does a good job at expanding upon the sonic palette of Shadow Zone by adding flashier choruses like on The Enemy, or I'm the One, or Skinny Man, while also expanding upon other elements of their band sound, like their drummer. The drumming on this record is really fucking good. The drummer gets in the pocket really well on The Enemy, on, you know, the jump the fuck upness of I Want to Fucking Break It, or on tracks like It's Migo, or the closing track Brain Fog, which has this nice snare interpolation with the synthetic atmospheres on here that almost feel like proto, what a lot of hip-hop is doing now, if that makes any sense. You know, this record is wholly a weird take, I know, because a lot of Static X fans, you know, they're like, Start a War, whatever. But for some reason, every time I revisit this album, I appreciate the drum work a lot more. Like on Skinny Man, the traveling drum line on that chorus just gets me every fucking time. You know, I like the overall sonic palette of this. It still has that beef that Shadow Zone is aiming for, but it doesn't feel as drenched in darkness sonically as that record did, for as clean as it was. It feels like it's trying to sort of branch out a little more and sound a little more diverse. You know, the guitars on here feel, again, a little less new metal-y and a little more just industrial adjacent. Think like a Filter, you know, and less like a Limp Bizkit, you know? It feels, it's trying to expand in a way that I can appreciate a lot, you know? When bands like Mudvayne were also trying to do the same thing to distance themselves from new metal in their own ways. This was like Static X's version of that. And I think it's cool. I think it's really cool. I like the synthetic sounds on here. While I don't think they're as interesting as like a Shadow Zone or a Wisconsin Death Trip, I like that they're still here. I like the elements where it does really do weird stuff with it, like Brain Fog, and I think that it's a good, again, expansion on the band sound in a way that doesn't feel too derivative. You know, I feel like this is a nice next step after like a Shadow Zone. I don't think it's a good gateway, but I think it's a good next step after Shadow Zone if you don't want something as overtly aggressive as Cannibal. I would go with Start a War, because it has really killer hook work, it has really nice guitar lines, and the drumming is off the fucking charts. It's a great record. It's my favorite for that reason mostly, because it's not as bogged down or as wrapped up in a niche as a record like Wisconsin Death Trip, nor is it as sort of cut and dry as like a Shadow Zone. It's like a little more than both of those records, in my opinion. I know, again, this is a weird take, but it's a take that's intrinsically mine, I guess, and I feel like it's just such a really good record to me, and it's one that I like to revisit because I like what's here a lot. You know, I thought spinning this again would make me feel differently. I honestly thought I would have put Shadow Zone at number 1 and Wisconsin at number 2, but I just kept gravitating back towards the sounds on this record. I don't know what that says about my taste, but I definitely really enjoy this record a fuck ton. And with that, we come to an end of another Reformatted Discography review. What did you think about this one? Did you like it? Did you not? Let me know in those comments down below, and be sure to give this video a like if you did like it. If you want to see the Patreon cut, the extended cut of this video, where I talk a lot about the scene that Static X came from, why they mean so much to me, and all that sort of stuff, it's linked in the description and actually dropped last year. But again, the Patreon both gets these in advance and gets extended cuts of them. So if you want to join the my patrons ranks and check these early, along with a slew of other spicy content for your eye holes and ear holes, it's linked in the description. But I'm going to get out of here. Thank you so very much for watching. And be sure to subscribe, because I don't think I said that yet. I've been Viral Rack. You guys have good days, life situations. And I'll see you another day.